Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about the major scale. So if we step back and look at the first thing we learned about the chromatic scale. And we learned that from the chromatic scale, you can get all these different intervals. And so the next step is a major scale. And a major scale is really cool because it allows you to think of things very quickly. It forms a focal point in music theory that acts as a sort of a reference point that you can use to get to other things much faster. So what the major scale is, and what any scale is now that we have our fundamental intervals defined, we can begin to combine sets of intervals. So we could say we're only going to use these intervals relative to a pitch. So there's actually a combination, and some people will call it whole step, half step, whole step, half step. And that's really great, except for, as I sort of talked about before, you've only learned minor seconds and major seconds if you learn that system. So it's way less versatile. It's going to slow you down. But if you know everything up to the perfect eighth from a fundamental tone, from a bass tone, so because you have to have a tone relative to get like a major second, but from what note? A perfect fifth, but from what note? Like, what are we going to do? I almost said perfect sixth. That was a close one. So the formula for the major scale is really easy to remember. It is, let me put some text up here. It's all major intervals and perfect intervals. So we start off with the perfect one, or the unison. So we'll put a U for unison. And then it goes a major second, a major third, a perfect fourth, a perfect fifth, a major sixth, a major seven, and then a perfect eighth, an octave. So you should be handy dandy with these intervals now. So now you say, oh, wow. So if you start with some note like C, if you form all these intervals, you will form a major scale. And these exercises are going to get you really comfortable in thinking in terms of scales. I've got a couple lined up for you. And I just want you to get really used to the sound of a major scale, because understanding the sound of a major scale is super useful when composing, when looking at a piece and saying, what is this thing going to sound like? Because you're going to be analyzing chords and stuff, but it's going to be really hard to just go straight off analysis. Being able to look into it and see what it's probably going to sound like goes a long ways towards you being able to do your proper analysis on it. So at least I've noticed that hugely when I started learning like sight singing and stuff. It started blowing my mind how important this was. So let's go ahead and build a major scale. So we know that we're going to be using these intervals. Let's build a D major scale. And I'm at the point now where I'm not going to walk through building every single interval. We're just going to sort of hop to intervals. So we're going to start on D. And so, because that's our fundamental tone, right? It's our unison is going to be D, because we're building a D major scale. And this is the formula for a major scale. So we say, okay, what's a major second? And we say, oh, a major second is E. And then we say, from D, what's a major third? And we say, oh, that's F sharp. And then we say, what's a perfect fourth from D? And we say, oh, that is G. What's a perfect fifth? We say that's A. What is a major sixth? And we say, oh, that's B. And then we have C sharp for the major seven. And then we have D. So a couple ways you can build some of these intervals quicker, and I'm going to show you another way to create scales, because doing it this way can produce correct notes, but in the wrong way. So for example, this is an F sharp, but I could have put a G flat. Right, that's the same note, F sharp, G flat. But the problem is now I have a hole, and so this is improperly written, not correct. So you don't want this. Plus now you have sharps and flats, and you have a natural hanging around. So it's very ambiguous, especially with the G. You're going to have to notate things. It will take away from the use of key signatures. So for these reasons, we do not use... There's a way to do this that will always result in the same correct pattern, even though you could technically be playing the same note. Because G flat, F sharp, the same deal. So this is our pattern, and a quick note on just building some quickly. You're gonna want to be able to pull perfect fifths out really fast. If you're not comfortable with the piano or something yet, you're gonna want to memorize perfect fifths from notes. So I suggest just going through saying, what's a perfect fifth from A? You think, oh, it's E. What's a perfect fifth from, I don't know, D? You think A. And so you just get really quick at that. Then After that, there's a couple other things that are kind of handy. I see all the people all the time. They get to this major 6 and major 7, and they start counting up the scale. And that can take a really long time. It's really easy to remember that a major 7 is actually just a minor second going down. So instead of thinking D and then going all the way up to the C sharp over here, you could just think, okay, my first note, my unison is a D. I just have to go down one key on the piano. So if I'm D, I was like, oh, it's C sharp. And look at that, C sharp. So it's much quicker to get to some of these intervals thinking of it that way. When you begin to learn chords and you begin to memorize scales, because there are some, you'll begin to memorize them. You're required to if you play an instrument and you plan on being good at it. So when you do that, you'll begin to form these reference points, and so you'll just be able to think, what's the fifth? Like if someone asks you, what's the perfect fourth? You can think, well, what's a fifth away? Because maybe you don't have the perfect fourth memorized quite yet. So you say D to A is the fifth, and then you go, oh, the fourth would be a G. So I want to point out a couple more things, and I'll show you the other way of doing this. So each one of these notes has a number associated with it, and this number represents the place it holds in the scale. And so if we type some of these in here, let me get rid of this top thing, move it up here. Major scale, put it next to the major scale. So we come here and we say, okay, this is the 1. It's pretty easy. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you'll hear people refer to these things according to the scale degrees. So these are called the scale degrees. You'll probably see a little hat on top of some of these guys referencing the scale degrees, because you can have like a lot of numbers just flying around. So sometimes it's useful to have notation. These degrees also refer to chords that we will be talking about later. But for now, you can think like if they say, what's the 5 in the key of D? They're saying if D is your 1, what's the fifth, the perfect fifth? And so this is just a much quicker way to talk about things. And so we will be using these terms consistently. We'll be using them quite a bit. So if I'm saying like, oh, the 7 from D, I'm talking about a C sharp. And then you'll hear people say like flat 5. So if I say flat 5, you think, well, that's the perfect fifth is an A. And if I flat that or lower it a half step, technically it's just lowering it a half step, then that would be an A flat, right? But if it was an A sharp, it would go down to an A. So flat, when they say flat an interval, they're talking about just lowering it a half step, not adding a flat to it. So, okay, that's the major scale. Let's talk about how to build these things a little more academically, because this is great, but if you're going to take a test on this, you're going to want to be able to write down the right notes. So the easy peasy way to do it is, if you can't remember it, you just write out all the intervals you need. So say unison. If it can be major or minor, put major. And if it can be augmented, diminished, or perfect, put perfect. So all major and perfect intervals. And the unison can be thought of as a perfect one. So, okay. Now, let's say that they've asked us to build let's choose a scale with some flats, a B flat major scale, something simple. So we say, okay, B flat major. So we're going to enter our notes here. We're going to start, we know our first note has to be B flat, right? Now, what you do is toss all thinking of harmonic keys and whatnot out of your head at this moment in time. In order for this scale to be correct, there must be a note on every space in line up to the next B flat. So we say, here's our first B flat. So we got to put a note here because that's the next line. Space, line, space, line, space, line. Okay, so now we have one. So now we will make each one of these notes conform to the correct interval. So you see now we won't run into that problem where we have like a natural and there's a weird stuff. That'll be completely resolved by doing this. So it's just like intervals. You have to count the lines and spaces and make the adjustments accordingly, right? Because if we move this up, in fact, we talked about this, so we can totally talk about it right now. If I move that up, if this has to be a major third and I make it a G flat, is it a major third anymore? We say, no, it's not a major third. Because if you count from this is a, what is this? A diminished fourth. Because we go D, 1, 2. Oh, whoops, we start on the 1 because it's a unison. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we say, oh, this is a 4 of some kind. And we say, well, the perfect 4 is a natural. So this is a flat. So this would be a diminished fourth. So this would not follow our our intervals. I just keep iterating this because I've seen so many people, myself, when I was in middle school, I used to say, why would composers use this stuff? There is a system. There's totally a system. And I wish someone had just told me, because then I would be like, oh, that makes sense. Like, okay, there's reasons, like good reasons too. It makes more sense too, just from a playing perspective. So, okay. So we've got our scale degree written, and we've got our spaces and lines filled out. And so now we're going to make them conform to the correct interval. So we say B, and then we say, oh, okay, we need a major second from B. And we say, is that a C? And we say, it is a C. And then we say, okay, a major third from B flat. I meant to say B flat before. So a major third from B flat, is it a D? And we say, oh, it is a D. And we go a perfect fourth. We say, is E natural to B flat a perfect fourth? And we come down here, maybe you have to write out the intervals. If you're new at this could take you a fair amount of time. But it's worth taking the time to figure it out. Like, don't just write this stuff off. Really important to do. So we say, okay, B flat to E flat. We look at this, we say, yep, you do your counting intervals, and we say it needs to be lowered a half step. So it's still a fourth, but now it's a perfect fourth. Before it was an augmented fourth, now it's a perfect fourth. Cool. And then we go on, and we say major six, perfect fifth, major six, major seven, and then the octave. And as you can see here, we got to have the flat at the top too, otherwise that's not an octave anymore. If it was this, it would be like an augmented octave, which is weird. So we don't want stuff like that hanging around. So there you go. And of course, our scale sounds like this. And so that sound is a sound you should memorize. You should be able to hum it, sing it, think in those terms. And what I'm going to do is, one of my exercises, we're going to be composing more melodies, and it's going to get you thinking in keys, hopefully in an intuitive way, in a more personal way, and also cause you to really get familiar with the sound of the major scale, because it's got a really strong sound to it. You've heard it all the time in all sorts of classical music. It's everywhere. And so modern music, we've developed these chord progressions that are largely based around the natural minor scale, well, the harmonic minor to a large extent, and the major scale. So it's kind of an interesting deal. So major scale is just a really important deal for a lot of reasons. But as you see, as you begin to lay these out, we will begin to form reference points that we can move around in. And I just realized, I don't know when I did that. No, I remember when I did that. I was explaining things. Yeah, that should be sharp. Okay, cool. So we're going to be building scales. And as you can deduct, we have the ability to make 12 of these because we have 12 notes. So that's where that goes. And yeah, as we do this, we're going to come up with other scales and sets, but just really get comfortable with this. If you have any questions about major scales, let me know. There's a couple cool features about a major scale that make it desirable. One of those features is this right here. So this is a half step, right? We go from A to B flat. So we go. That's just, if you just listen to that all by itself, it just sounds, it's just resolving upwards. If we go to like the D, we have a C sharp to a D, right? So we have C sharp. And so if we play our D major scale, right? And we see. So we take notice that that's a very powerful resolution. It's dun, dun, dun. Sorry, I'm not the best singer. Dun, dun. It's just like, oh man, it's pulling to there. It's very compelling. This is going to become a very important idea as we go. There are a couple others, like the fifth is pretty much always there. But this stuff right here, I just want to point that relationship out now. It's going to become important. If you have any questions about this stuff, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.